I'll work for you forever, I swear on my dead father, just don't let my mama die like he did. The words hit the sterile air of Hillside Pharmacy like a gunshot. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The fluorescent lights above buzzed in the sudden, suffocating silence as if the building itself had inhaled sharply and forgotten how to breathe. A man in a $5,000 charcoal suit, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commands boardrooms, froze mid-step, his hand still reaching for the blood pressure medication he'd come to collect. Marcus Hills, the pharmaceutical billionaire whose company manufactured the very drugs lining these walls, found himself staring at a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and comment where you're watching from, whether you're in Australia, Canada, the United States, Africa, the UK, or anywhere across Europe. I want to see how far this story of unexpected twist can reach. I bring you powerful, heartfelt, and challenging stories every single day, and trust me, you don't want to miss tomorrow's story. But right now, let me take you inside that pharmacy where a desperate child met a billionaire who'd forgotten how to feel. Now let's dive. A little girl, no more than 10 years old, stood trembling at the counter. Her matted locks were tangled with debris, her oversized coat hung off her thin frame like a burial shroud, and in her arms, clutched against her chest with desperate protective ferocity, was a toddler whose lips had turned a terrifying shade of blue. The child wasn't crying. He was barely breathing. "Miss, I've told you 3 times already," the pharmacist snapped, her voice sharp with annoyance. "No payment, no medicine. You need to leave before I call security." The girl didn't move. Instead, she thrust forward a small plastic sandwich bag filled with pennies and nickels. Her hand shook so violently the coins rattled like bones. "I have $4.67, she said, her voice cracking but somehow still defiant. "Please. Just give me something. Anything. My mama's turning blue too. She can't wake up right. The shelter lady said if she doesn't get insulin in the next few hours." "The prescription is $340, the pharmacist interrupted coldly. "Now please, you're disrupting other customers." That's when the girl turned. Her eyes, enormous, desperate, burning with a fury that shouldn't exist in a child, scanned the pharmacy like a drowning person searching for a lifeline. They landed on Marcus. On his designer suit. His platinum credit card. His expensive watch that cost more than most people's cars. She lunged toward him, small fingers grabbing his sleeve with surprising strength. "Sir, please." Her voice rose to a desperate wail that seemed to crack something open in the universe itself. "I'll give you my whole life. Every day. Every breath. Just save her. Please. Don't let her go to sleep like Daddy did." And Marcus Hills, the man who'd built an empire pricing human life itself, felt his carefully constructed world shatter. Marcus's Mercedes pulled up to what could only be described as a corpse of a building. The condemned tenement on Harper Street leaned like a drunk against the night sky, its windows either boarded up or shattered into jagged teeth, graffiti screaming across crumbling brick walls. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the wind, and a faded demolition notice was plastered across the entrance, scheduled for demolition, and no trespassing, unsafe structure. "Sir, you can't be serious," his driver said, staring at the building with undisguised horror. That thing could collapse at any moment. Marcus was already out of the car, pharmacy bags in hand. "Wait here. Call 911. Tell them we need an ambulance at this location immediately." Esther pushed past him, moving with the practiced speed of someone who'd navigated these dangers 100 times. "3rd floor. We gotta hurry." The entrance reeked of urine, mold, and something else Marcus couldn't identify, the smell of human desperation left to rot. His shoes crunched on broken glass and scattered needles as they climbed stairs that groaned ominously under their weight. Entire sections of railing were missing. Holes gaped in the walls where copper pipes had been ripped out by scavengers. "How long have you been living here?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. 2 weeks. Since they kicked us out of the shelter." Esther's matter-of-fact tone made it worse somehow. "Mama found this room. She said at least it had a door that locked." The 3rd-floor hallway was pitch black except for Esther's small flashlight. She led him to a door barely hanging on its hinges and pushed it open. Nothing in Marcus's life, not his Ivy League education, not his corner office overlooking Manhattan, not his penthouse worth $40 million, had prepared him for what he saw. The room was barely 10 feet square, with holes in the ceiling that let in rain and sleet. Cardboard boxes lined the walls in a pathetic attempt at insulation. A single camping lantern provided weak, flickering light. And there, on a pile of flattened cardboard and a thin emergency blanket, lay a woman who looked more dead than alive. Maya couldn't have been more than 30, but suffering had aged her decades. Her dark skin had a grayish pallor, her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps, and her body convulsed with violent shivers despite the 3 threadbare coats piled on top of her. Beside her lay an empty insulin pen and a notebook where she'd written, in increasingly shaky handwriting, "Esther, if I don't wake up, take Malik to Pastor James on 5th Street. Tell him I'm sorry. I love you both more than my own breath." Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his expensive suit soaking up dirty water from the floor. His hands shook as he checked her pulse, weak, thready, barely there. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her fingertips blue. "How long has she been like this?" he demanded. "Since yesterday morning." Esther was already tearing open the pharmacy bags with desperate efficiency. "I tried to wake her up, but she just makes sounds. Scary sounds." Marcus had 3 medical degrees hanging in his office, honorary, ceremonial, meaningless. In this moment, surrounded by wealth he couldn't spend and power he couldn't wield, he realized with crushing clarity that he knew nothing about actually saving a life. He could buy hospitals, but he couldn't perform miracles. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the insulin pen, reading the instructions with growing panic. The ambulance was coming, but would it arrive in time? "Let me," Esther said quietly, taking the pen from his shaking hands. "I've done this before. Lots of times." And Marcus Hills, billionaire, pharmaceutical titan, master of the universe, watched a 10-year-old homeless child do what he could not, fight death with nothing but courage and love. The ambulance screamed through rain-slicked streets, its sirens wailing like a desperate prayer. Marcus sat in the back, watching paramedics work on Maya with controlled urgency while Esther clutched Malik in the corner, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. When they burst through the emergency room doors of Mercy General, Marcus made 3 phone calls that changed everything. Within 20 minutes, Maya was transferred from the overcrowded ER to a private suite on the executive floor, the wing reserved for donors, celebrities, and people whose names appeared on buildings. The chief of endocrinology appeared personally, along with a team of specialists Marcus had summoned with nothing more than his name and the promise of a substantial donation. Money, he'd learned long ago, could move mountains. Or at least hospital administrators. "We've stabilized her glucose levels," Dr. Okonkwo reported, her Nigerian accent crisp with professional confidence. "She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and her kidneys are showing signs of damage from untreated diabetes. Another few hours and we'd be having a very different conversation." "She's lucky." "Lucky." Marcus looked at Esther, who'd fallen asleep in the chair still wearing his $4,000 coat, Malik curled against her chest. This wasn't luck. This was a child's love battling against a system designed to let people like Maya disappear. Maya woke 3 days later to ceiling tiles that didn't leak, sheets that didn't smell like mildew, and the steady beep of machines monitoring her every breath. Her eyes opened slowly, confused, then immediately panicked as she registered her surroundings. "Esther," she croaked, trying to sit up. "Where's my mama?" Esther was at her side instantly, tears streaming. "You're okay. You're okay now." Maya grabbed her daughter's face with trembling hands, checking her for injuries, for signs of harm. "Where are we? How did we?" Her eyes landed on Marcus, who'd been standing quietly by the window, and her entire body went rigid. "Who are you?" The question came out sharp, defensive, the tone of a woman who'd learned that nothing came free, that kindness always had a price tag attached. Marcus stepped forward carefully, hands visible, non-threatening. "My name is Marcus Hills. I found Esther at the pharmacy. She was trying to get your insulin." Maya's eyes darted around the room, the private suite, the flowers someone had sent, the expensive equipment, the view of the city skyline. Her breathing quickened. What do you want? I'm sorry. Men like you don't do things like this without wanting something back. Maya's voice grew stronger with suspicion, with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd been exploited before. This room probably costs thousands a day. The doctors, the tests. What's your angle? You want my kidneys? You running some kind of research study? Or is it simpler than that? You one of those rich men who preys on desperate women? Mama, no. Esther protested. He saved you. He paid for everything and he didn't ask for nothing. Nobody does nothing for nothing, baby. That's not how the world works. Maya tried to pull out her We're leaving. Right now. Get Malik. Marcus held up both hands. Mrs. Don't call me that. It's Maya. And I don't care what your name is or how much money you got. I've seen what happens when people like you help people like me. There's always a debt. Always a catch. And I can't, her voice cracked. I can't owe anyone anything anymore. Not my body, not my kids, not my soul. The raw terror in her eyes told Marcus everything about the kind of help she'd received before. The kind that came with chains attached. You're right, he said quietly, and watched surprise flicker across her face. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not trust, not even your time. But your daughter made me a promise at that pharmacy, and I intend to make sure she lives long enough to keep it. Maya stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the trap. What promise? That she'd work for me her whole life to pay back your medicine. Marcus's voice roughened. She offered me everything she'll ever have, every day, every breath, just to keep you breathing. So here's my counteroffer. You get well, you let these doctors help you, and when you're ready, you walk out of here free. No debt. No strings. Just a second chance. Why? Maya whispered, the single word heavy with years of disappointment. Marcus looked at Esther, then back at Maya. Because 5 years ago, my daughter needed help and the system said no. And I've spent every day since wondering if I could have done more, been faster, fought harder. I can't save Rebecca. But maybe, his voice broke, maybe I can save you. The room fell silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Maya's hands shook as she touched her daughter's face, then slowly, reluctantly, she lay back against the pillows. 1 week, she said finally. I'll stay 1 week. Then we're gone. Marcus nodded. It was more than he'd hoped for. It was a beginning. Marcus's estate sat behind iron gates in the kind of neighborhood where silence was purchased by the acre. The main house, a modernist monument of glass and steel, gleamed coldly in the afternoon sun like a beautiful mausoleum. He bought it 5 years ago, right after Rebecca died, thinking a fresh start would somehow erase the memories. Instead, he just built a bigger tomb to haunt. This is where you live. Esther pressed her face against the car window, her breath fogging the glass. It looks like a museum. It feels like one too, Marcus muttered, then caught himself. Maya sat rigid in the passenger seat, her discharge papers clutched in white-knuckled hands. She'd agreed to stay at his guest house only after Dr. Okonkwo had firmly explained that returning to the tenement would kill her within a month. The guest house was actually larger than most people's homes. 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, its own small garden. Marcus had used it exactly twice in 5 years, both times for business associates he'd been too polite to refuse. Now, watching Esther race from room to room with Malik bouncing on her hip, he wondered why he'd let it sit empty for so long. There's a real bathtub. Esther's shriek of joy echoed through the halls. Mama, come see. It's huge. Maya moved through the space like someone expecting the floor to disappear beneath her feet. She touched the granite countertops carefully, opened the refrigerator Marcus had stocked that morning, ran her fingers over the soft chenille throw blankets. This is too much, she said quietly. Way too much. It's what was available, Marcus replied, which was technically true. What he didn't say was that he'd had his housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, spend 2 days preparing the place. Fresh flowers, children's books, a crib for Malik, clothes in Esther's size hanging in the closet. How long? Maya asked. As long as you need. That's not an answer. Nothing's free. What do you actually want from us? Marcus opened his mouth to reassure her again, but Esther's laughter suddenly rang out from the garden. Pure, uninhibited, the sound of a child who'd temporarily forgotten that life was a battlefield. Through the window, he could see her chasing butterflies, her arms spread wide, Malik clapping from his spot on the grass. The sound hit Marcus like a physical blow. He gripped the counter, his vision blurring. That laugh. That exact pitch and cadence. Rebecca had laughed like that, in the garden of their old house, before the diagnosis, before everything shattered. Mr. Hills. Maya's voice cut through the memory. You okay? He wasn't. He was drowning in the ghost of joy, in the absence that had carved him hollow. But he nodded anyway, cleared his throat. Fine. I should go. Let you settle in. Mrs. Chun left her number on the fridge if you need anything. He was halfway to the main house when Esther's voice stopped him. Mr. Marcus. She ran up, breathless, her eyes shining. Thank you. For real. Nobody's ever been this nice to us. You're welcome, he managed. Can I ask you something? Why's your house so quiet? Don't you got kids or a wife or anybody? The question, delivered with a child's brutal honesty, nearly broke him. I did once, he said softly. A daughter. But she's gone now. Esther's face shifted, understanding flooding in too fast for someone her age. Like my daddy's gone. Yes. Like that. She reached out and took his hand, small, warm, alive. Then you probably get real lonely in that big house. You should come have dinner with us sometime. Mama makes really good spaghetti when she's feeling okay. And I'm great at setting tables now. Marcus looked down at this child who'd survived homelessness, hunger and near orphanhood, yet somehow still had room in her heart to worry about a billionaire's loneliness. I'd like that, he heard himself say. That night, lying in his king-sized bed in his silent mansion, Marcus heard it again, Esther's laughter drifting through the open window, carried on the summer breeze. And for the first time in 5 years, the silence didn't feel quite so suffocating. Something frozen inside him had begun, impossibly, to thaw. Marcus woke at 2:47 a.m. to the security system chiming, a soft alert that the guest house door had opened. He lay still for a moment, telling himself it was nothing, maybe Maya getting water, maybe Esther checking on something. But instinct, the same instinct that had built his empire, screamed that something was wrong. He pulled on clothes and crossed the lawn barefoot, dew-soaking his feet. Through the guest house window, he could see movement, frantic and furtive. The lights were off, but someone was moving through the rooms with a flashlight. The door was unlocked. Inside, he found Maya stuffing their few belongings into plastic bags with shaking hands. Esther stood in her pajamas, confusion and fear warring on her face, while Malik whimpered in his carrier. What are you doing? Marcus kept his voice low, non-threatening. Maya spun around, eyes wild. We're leaving. We shouldn't have stayed this long. It's been 4 days. 4 days too many. She zipped a bag closed with violent force. I can't do this. I can't wake up every morning in silk sheets knowing it's all gonna disappear. I can't let Esther get used to safety when there's no such thing for people like us. Maya. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't tell me it's gonna be okay. Don't tell me to trust you. I've trusted before. I trusted Esther's father when he said he'd take care of us. I trusted the shelter director who said we could stay as long as we needed, right up until she kicked us out. I trusted the social worker who promised to help, then lost our file. Every time I trust, every time I let myself believe things might get better, the floor gets pulled out and we fall harder than before. Mama, please, Esther whispered. I like it here. Malik's getting better. You're getting better. And what happens when Mr. Hills decides he's done playing savior? What happens when the novelty wears off and he realizes we're not worth the trouble? We go back to nothing, baby, but now you'll know what you're missing. Now you'll remember what warm feels like while you're freezing. That's worse. That's so much worse. Marcus understood then. This wasn't about him at all. This was about a woman who'd been conditioned to expect abandonment, who'd learned that hope was just another word for heartbreak delayed. "You're right," he said quietly. Maya blinked, thrown off balance. "What?" "You're right not to trust me. You barely know me. I could disappear tomorrow. I could change my mind. I could be lying about everything." He sat down slowly on the couch, making himself smaller, less threatening. "But here's what I know, it's 2:47 in the morning, it's 38 degrees outside, and Malik's still recovering from pneumonia. So even if you don't trust me, even if you think I'm the worst kind of liar, give it until morning. Let the kids sleep in warm beds for one more night. Then if you still want to leave, I'll drive you anywhere you want to go. No questions. No guilt. Just your choice." "Why would you do that?" "Because my daughter spent her last night in a hospital bed, terrified and in pain, and I couldn't do anything but watch." His voice cracked. "If I can give Esther and Malik even one more peaceful night, then maybe Rebecca's death meant something. Maybe all this money I've made destroying lives with drug prices can actually save one for once." The raw honesty seemed to drain the fight from Maya. She sank onto the chair, her hands covering her face. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I'm so tired of being afraid." "I know." "How do you know? You live in a mansion. You've never been afraid of where your next meal's coming from or whether you'll freeze to death in your sleep." "No," Marcus agreed. "But I've been afraid of waking up every morning knowing I failed the person I loved most. I've been afraid that my life is just an expensive distraction from the fact that I couldn't save her. Fear looks different, but it cuts the same." Esther crept over and climbed into her mother's lap, wrapping her arms around Maya's neck. "Can we stay till morning, Mama? Please? I'm really sleepy." Maya held her daughter close, rocking slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Till morning." Marcus stood quietly. "I'll be in the main house if you need anything." He was almost at the door when Maya called out, "Mr. Hills." He turned. "Your daughter, what was her name?" "Rebecca." Maya nodded slowly. "I'm sorry you lost her. No parent should have to bury their child." "No," Marcus agreed, his throat tight. "They shouldn't." He walked back across the lawn as dawn began to gray the sky, wondering if morning would bring an empty guest house or something that looked impossibly like a second chance. Morning came, and the guest house was empty. Marcus stood in the doorway staring at neatly made beds, folded towels, and a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for everything. We can't stay. I'm sorry. He should have expected this. Should have known that 4 days of safety couldn't undo years of survival instinct. But the hollow ache in his chest felt like losing Rebecca all over again, watching someone slip away because he hadn't been enough, hadn't done enough, hadn't said the right words to make them stay. Mrs. Chun found him still standing there an hour later. "Mr. Hills? Should I prepare the rooms for new guests?" "No." The word came out sharp. "Find them. Check shelters, bus stations, anywhere someone with 2 kids and no money would go. Now." His driver called 40 minutes later. "Sir, I found them. Greyhound station on 7th. They're in line for tickets." Marcus broke every speed limit getting there. The station was crowded with early morning travelers, businessmen with briefcases, families with overstuffed luggage, and there near the ticket counter, Maya with Malik strapped to her chest and Esther clutching their plastic bags like precious cargo. "Maya!" Marcus pushed through the crowd. She turned, her face hardening when she saw him. "Don't. Please don't make this harder than it already is." "Where are you going?" "Away. Somewhere. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." He was breathing hard, his carefully constructed composure crumbling. "It matters because I've already lost one daughter and I won't, watch another child disappear into a system designed to chew her up and spit her out." "She's not your daughter," Maya said, but her voice wavered. "I know that." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, aware they were drawing stairs. "God, I know that. But Rebecca was 7 when she died. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The treatment existed, cutting-edge immunotherapy that could have saved her. But our insurance denied it. Called it experimental. Too expensive. I begged them. I threatened lawsuits. I offered to pay out of pocket, but I wasn't rich enough then, wasn't powerful enough. I was just a mid-level pharmaceutical executive who couldn't save his own child. Maya's expression shifted, the hardness cracking. She died in my arms asking why the medicine couldn't find her. Why the doctors gave up. And I had no answer except that her life wasn't worth enough to the people making decisions. His voice broke completely. So I built an empire. I became the person making those decisions. I told myself I'd never let cost be the reason someone died. But you know what I did instead? I became exactly what killed her. I set prices. I denied coverage. I put profits over people because it was easier than admitting I'd failed her. Tears streamed down his face, years of carefully controlled grief finally spilling over in a crowded bus station. When Esther grabbed my sleeve in that pharmacy, when she promised me her whole life for her mother's medicine, I saw Rebecca. I saw the daughter I failed. And I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could save you, if I could help this one family, then maybe Rebecca's death wouldn't be completely meaningless. Maybe I could become the man she thought I was before the disease took her. Esther had started crying too, still clutching her bags. Maya stood frozen, her own eyes glistening. I'm not asking you to trust me, Marcus continued, his voice raw. I'm asking you to let me try. Let me be the person who doesn't give up. Who doesn't walk away. Who fights for you the way I should have fought harder for her. Not because you owe me. Not because I'm buying redemption. But because Esther deserves a childhood where she doesn't have to beg strangers for her mother's medicine. Because Malik deserves to grow up knowing warmth and safety. Because you deserve to heal without looking over your shoulder every second waiting for the next disaster. The loudspeaker announced boarding for the 9:15 bus to Cleveland. Maya's ticket was clutched in her trembling hand. I'm scared, she whispered finally. I'm so scared of believing this is real. So am I, Marcus admitted. I'm terrified I'll fail you like I failed Rebecca. But I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. Maya looked down at Esther, who was staring up at her with desperate, hopeful eyes. Then at Malik, peaceful against her chest. Then back at Marcus, this broken billionaire crying in public, his grief and guilt finally visible after years of hiding behind wealth and power. If we come back, she said slowly, things have to change. No more charity. No more you doing everything. I need to work. I need to contribute. I need to know I'm earning our place, not just accepting handouts. Deal, Marcus said immediately. My foundation needs someone who understands what it's like to navigate the system. Someone who can tell us where we're failing people. The job's yours if you want it. A real job? With a real salary. A real job with benefits, 401k, the whole package. You'll probably hate me as a boss, but at least you'll hate me on your own terms. For the first time since he'd met her, Maya smiled, small, cautious, but real. You're really bad at this savior thing, you know that? I'm learning. He smiled back through tears. Esther dropped her bags and threw her arms around Marcus's waist. Does this mean we can come home? Home. The word hit him like absolution. Yeah, kid. Let's go home. 3 months of peace shattered with a knock on the guest house door. Marcus was reviewing foundation proposals in his study when he heard Maya scream. Not a startled yelp, but a primal sound of terror that sent him sprinting across the lawn. He burst through the door to find Maya backed against the wall, Esther and Malik behind her, while a man in a cheap suit stood in the doorway with a smile that belonged on a predator. Now, Maya. That's no way to greet an old friend. The man's voice oozed false charm. He was maybe 50, with slicked back hair and the kind of cold eyes that enjoyed causing pain. Been looking for you for quite a while. Imagine my surprise when I saw your daughter's picture in the paper. Local girl receives full scholarship from Hill's Foundation. Real heartwarming stuff. Get out, Maya's voice shook. You have no right to be here. Actually, I have every right. He pulled papers from his briefcase with theatrical flair. See, you still owe Cross Financial Services $47,000 in outstanding payday loans, plus interest and fees. That brings your current balance to $93,000. I'm here to collect. Marcus stepped fully into the room. Who are you? The man's eyes lit up with recognition and opportunity. Vincent Cross. I run a legitimate debt collection agency. And you must be the famous Marcus Hills. Perfect. Since you're clearly funding Ms. Johnson's new lifestyle, you can write me a check and we'll call it even. Those loans were predatory, Maya said, her voice gaining strength. You charged 400% interest. You knew I'd never be able to pay them back. Should have read the fine print, sweetheart. Vincent's smile widened. Now, Mr. Hills seems like a reasonable man. I'm sure he doesn't want any negative publicity about harboring someone who refuses to pay their debts. Bad look for a philanthropist. How much did she actually borrow? Marcus asked quietly. Does it matter? A debt's a debt. How much? Vincent shrugged. Original loans totaled $3,200. But with late fees, collection costs, legal fees. You turned $3,200 into $93,000. Marcus's voice could have frozen fire. That's not lending. That's extortion. It's legal, and I have the courts on my side. Vincent pulled out another document. This here's a wage garnishment order. Signed by a judge. I can seize her assets, her income, and he paused dramatically, his eyes landing on Esther. In cases of severe delinquency, I can petition for custodial review. Make sure children aren't being raised in financially unstable environments. Maya's knees nearly buckled. You can't take my daughter. Oh, I can do a lot of things when parents can't provide. But hey, pay me what you owe, and this all goes away. His smile turned vicious. I'll even give you a discount. Let's call it an even $75,000. You got 3 days. Marcus felt rage so pure it was almost clarifying. This was the system he'd helped build, the one that crushed people already on the ground, that turned desperation into profit, that weaponized poverty. Get out of my property. Make me pay, and this goes federal. I'll tie Ms. Johnson up in courts for years. And those custody evaluations? They take time. Time Esther would spend in foster care while things get sorted out. Vincent headed for the door, then turned back. 3 days, Maya. Clock's ticking. After he left, Maya collapsed. Not dramatically, just a slow slide down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. He'll do it, she whispered. He's done it to other women. I heard stories at the shelter. Women who fought back and lost their kids. Esther was crying silently, understanding enough to be terrified. Malik, sensing the tension, began to wail. Marcus crouched beside Maya. He's not taking Esther. You can't stop him. He's got lawyers, judges, the whole system behind him. Then we get a bigger system. Marcus pulled out his phone. I know people. Good people. We fight this. With what? I can't afford lawyers like he has. Marcus met her eyes. But I can. And unlike him, I actually know how to fight. For the first time since Vincent's arrival, something like hope flickered in Maya's face. Why would you do that? Because that man just made a critical error, Marcus said, his voice cold with purpose. He threatened someone I care about. And I don't lose twice. The conference room on the 47th floor of Hill's pharmaceutical headquarters was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 30, and air so cold it felt like walking into a vault. Vincent Cross sat at one end with his lawyers, 3 sharp-suited men who'd made careers out of bleeding the poor dry. Maya sat at the other end, flanked by Marcus and his legal team, looking like she might bolt at any moment. This is unnecessary, Vincent said, checking his watch with exaggerated boredom. We could have settled this with a simple payment. But since Mr. Hills wants to play White Knight, let's make it official. He pushed papers across the table. Debt validation, signed court orders, everything above board. Ms. Johnson owes $93,000, and I'm here to collect. Marcus's lead attorney Patricia Chun, a woman whose reputation for eviscerating opposing counsel was legendary, didn't even glance at the papers. Mr. Cross, are you aware that charging interest rates above 36% violates federal lending laws for active-duty military and, as of last year, their families? Ms. Johnson isn't military. No, but her late husband was. Killed in action in Afghanistan 5 years ago. Patricia slid a different set of papers forward. Which makes these loans not just unethical, but illegal. The Service Members Civil Relief Act extends to surviving spouses for 5 years post-death. You've been collecting on a legal debt. Vincent's smile faltered. That's not. I wasn't informed of military status. You were required to verify. You didn't. Patricia's voice could cut glass. But here's where it gets interesting. We pulled your company's records. Public information, really. In the last 3 years, Cross Financial has filed 847 custody challenges against debtors. Of those, 89% were single mothers. 76% were women of color. You're not running a collection agency, Mr. Cross. You're running an extortion ring that weaponizes the family court system. That's defamatory. It's documented. Marcus leaned forward. I've already sent this information to the Attorney General, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and about 15 journalists who are very interested in your business practices. But here's my offer. You forgive Maya's debt entirely, you shut down operations in this state, and you walk away. Or I spend the next year of my life and whatever money it takes to make sure you end up in prison. Vincent's lawyers whispered urgently to him. His face had gone pale. You can't prove criminal intent. Watch me. Marcus's voice was ice. I've built empires on less. And unlike you, I can afford to lose money on principle. The room fell silent except for the whisper of papers as Vincent's team conferred. Finally, Vincent spoke, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. What exactly are you proposing? Debt forgiveness for Maya. Debt forgiveness for every single mother you've filed custody challenges against in the last 5 years. You sell your company and retire. Or I bury you. That's hundreds of cases. Then you better start processing paperwork. Vincent looked at Maya, perhaps hoping to find weakness, a crack he could exploit. Instead, he found her standing, her hands flat on the table, her voice steady and clear. You told me I was nothing. That people like me don't matter. That I'd always be under someone's boot. She glanced at Marcus, then back at Vincent. But here's what you didn't understand. I'm not alone anymore. And neither are the other women you've destroyed. This is blackmail, Vincent spat. No, Patricia corrected. This is consequences. Sign the agreement or spend your retirement in court. Your choice. 20 minutes later, Vincent Cross signed documents forgiving Maya's debt and agreeing to a complete audit of his business practices. As he stood to leave, Marcus stopped him with a final warning. If you come near Maya or her children again, if you even think about retaliating, I will know. And I will finish what we started here today. Are we clear? Vincent didn't answer. He just grabbed his briefcase and left, his lawyers trailing behind like rats fleeing a sinking ship. After they were gone, Maya sat down slowly, her hands shaking. Is it really over? It's over, Marcus confirmed. I thought people like him always won. They do, Marcus said quietly, until someone with more power decides they shouldn't. That's the system, broken, unfair, and rigged for people like me. But today, for once, we used it right. Maya looked around the conference room, at the view, the power, the insulated world of wealth that had just been weaponized on her behalf. This is your world, she said. Boardrooms and lawyers and making people disappear with paperwork. It is, Marcus admitted. And I hate that it took all of this just to give you what you deserved from the beginning, basic dignity and freedom from predators. Esther, who'd been waiting outside with Mrs. Chun, burst through the doors. Is it done? Is the bad man gone? Maya scooped her up, holding her tight. He's gone, baby. He can't hurt us anymore. Because Mr. Marcus scared him? Marcus smiled faintly. Because your mom's stronger than any of them realized. I just made sure they knew it too. But as they left the building, stepping out of the corporate tower and back into sunlight, Marcus understood something fundamental had shifted. Maya had entered his world today, seen its power, its machinery, its capacity for both harm and protection. And she'd walked out still standing, no longer a victim but a survivor who knew exactly how the system worked. She didn't need saving anymore. She needed weapons. And Marcus had just shown her where they were kept. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel glittered with wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables where pharmaceutical executives, investors, and healthcare lobbyists sipped champagne that cost more per glass than a vial of insulin. Marcus sat at the head table, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, his expression carefully neutral as the evening speeches droned on about innovation, market forces, and shareholder value, the same sanitized language that turned human suffering into quarterly earnings reports. Maya stood backstage in a simple black dress Marcus had insisted on buying, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold her notes. I can't do this, she whispered to Esther, who'd been allowed to come as her support. These people, they're not going to listen to me. They listened to Mr. Marcus when he said you were speaking, Esther squeezed her hand. And you're way braver than any of them. The MC's voice boomed through the sound system. And now, I'd like to introduce a special guest. Maya Johnson, Community Outreach Director for the Hills Foundation, will share her perspective on accessible healthcare. Community Outreach Director. 6 months ago, Maya had been dying on a cardboard floor. Now she was walking onto a stage in front of 500 people who controlled the fate of millions. The spotlight hit her like a physical force. She gripped the podium, her notes blurring before her eyes. In the front row, Marcus gave her an almost imperceptible nod. You've got this. 3 months ago, Maya began, her voice shaking, my 10-year-old daughter stood in a pharmacy and offered a stranger her entire life in exchange for my insulin. She promised to work for him forever, every day, every breath, because that's what she thought a mother's life was worth. The room had gone silent. No clinking glasses, no whispered conversations. The insulin I needed cost $340 for a week's supply. It costs $11 to manufacture. I know this because the man who saved my life that day, Marcus Hills, runs the company that makes it. And that gap, that 3,000% markup, is why I almost died. It's why my daughter learned to inject me at age 8. It's why we lived in a condemned building, hiding from a system that treats poverty like a moral failure instead of a policy choice. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. Maya's hands steadied. I was a nurse before I got sick. I worked at County General, taking care of diabetic patients, watching them ration insulin because they couldn't afford their prescriptions. I'd give them samples, teach them to stretch doses, knowing I was watching them die slowly because the math didn't work. $100 for insulin or rent, medicine or food for their kids. Nobody should have to make those choices. Nobody. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by years of suppressed rage. And then I became one of them. I lost my job when I got too sick to work. Lost my insurance. Lost my apartment. Lost everything except my children. And you know what I learned? That the same system I'd worked in, the same hospitals I'd bled for, would let me die on their doorstep because I couldn't pay. She looked directly at a table of pharmaceutical executives, their faces carefully blank. Some of you are probably thinking I should have made better choices. Should have saved more, worked harder, been smarter. But I did everything right. I worked full-time. I had insurance. Then my husband died in Afghanistan, my daughter got sick, I missed too much work, and suddenly I was disposable. That's not a personal failure. That's systemic design. Marcus watched tears stream down her face, but she didn't stop. She was magnificent, a woman transformed from victim to warrior, using her pain as a weapon against the very people who'd profited from it. Mr. Hills asked me to speak tonight because he knows what you need to hear. That every policy decision you make, every price increase you justify, every cost-cutting measure you implement, those aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're my daughter learning what death sounds like. Their children growing up knowing their parents' life has a price tag they can't afford. Their families destroyed because we've decided healthcare is a commodity instead of a human right. She paused, letting the silence stretch. I'm standing here tonight because one man looked at my daughter and saw his own. Because wealth and power, for once, bent toward mercy instead of profit. But I shouldn't have needed a billionaire's charity to survive. Neither should anyone else. Maya pulled out a small insulin pen and held it up. This is what almost killed me. This tiny piece of plastic and medicine that costs pennies to make and hundreds to buy. How many people in this room have made decisions that put profit margins above the lives this could save? No one answered. No one moved. I'm still breathing, Maya said, her voice breaking with emotion and defiance. But thousands aren't. Thousands have died rationing insulin, skipping doses, choosing death over debt. And every single one of those deaths is on us, on a system we built, maintain, and profit from. So tonight, I'm asking you, what's it going to take? How many more daughters have to beg strangers for their mother's medicine before we admit this is murder by policy? She stepped back from the podium. The silence stretched so long Marcus thought the room might have frozen entirely. Then from the back, someone began to clap. Then another. Then the entire ballroom erupted, not polite applause, but standing thunderous, the kind of ovation that acknowledged truth even when it hurt. Maya walked off stage into Marcus's arms, her body shaking. Was that okay? You just changed everything, he whispered. And he was right. By morning, her speech had gone viral. By the end of the week, 3 major pharmaceutical companies had announced price reduction initiatives. By the end of the month, Maya Johnson, homeless mother survivor warrior, had become the face of a movement that refused to let people die for profit. She was still breathing. And now, so were countless others. 7 years later, Marcus sat in the third row of Johns Hopkins Medical School's graduation ceremony, watching names scroll across the program. The amphitheater buzzed with proud families, camera flashes, and the particular joy that comes from watching dreams become credentials. Maya sat beside him, elegant in navy blue Malik, now a gangly 12-year-old, fidgeting with his phone on her other side. Do you think she's nervous? Maya asked. Esther? She faced down predatory lenders at 10. I think she can handle a graduation speech. When Esther's name was called as valedictorian, the applause was thunderous. She walked to the podium in her white coat, her locks now styled in an elegant crown, her face showing the transformation from frightened child to confident woman. At 17, having skipped grades and accelerated through pre-med, she was the youngest graduate in the program's history. 7 years ago, Esther began, her voice clear and strong. I stood in a pharmacy with $4.67 in pennies, begging a stranger to save my mother's life. I promised him I'd work for him forever if he'd just help us. He said yes. But more importantly, he asked what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told him I wanted to be a doctor so no one else would have to beg for medicine. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Maya reached over and squeezed his hand. That man taught me that wealth without purpose is just expensive emptiness. That power without compassion is just legalized cruelty. And that sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is see someone's humanity when the world has decided they're invisible. Esther's eyes found Marcus in the crowd. Mr. Hills didn't just save my mother that day. He saved me from believing that people like us don't matter. That our lives aren't worth fighting for. She paused, emotion threatening to crack her composure. Today, I'm Dr. Esther Johnson. Tomorrow, I start my residency in emergency medicine at County General, the same hospital that once turned my mother away. And I'm going to spend every single day making sure that what happened to my family never happens to anyone else. That's the debt I owe. Not to one man, but to everyone who's ever been told their life costs too much. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, in the courtyard where families gathered for photos, Esther found Marcus standing apart from the crowd, his eyes red-rimmed. She walked up to him, formal in her white coat, and pulled something from her pocket. "I believe I owe you money," she said with a smile. It was a $1 bill, crisp and new, but across it she'd written in careful script, "Payment in full for 1 life saved, 2 lives changed, and countless others inspired. Thank you for believing a promise from a scared little girl was worth keeping." Marcus stared at the bill, his vision blurring. "Esther, you don't. I promised I'd pay you back when I grew up." She pressed it into his hand. "I'm grown up now. And this," she gestured at her white coat, at Maya beaming nearby, at Malik chasing his cousins across the lawn, "this is me keeping my promise. Not with money, but with purpose." Marcus pulled her into a hug, this young woman who'd once clutched his sleeve in desperation, who'd offered her entire future for her mother's present. "Your father would be so proud," he whispered. "I think he is," Esther replied. "Both of them." That evening, Marcus returned to his study, the one that had once been a shrine to empty success, and carefully placed the dollar bill in a frame. Below it, he added a small plaque, "The most valuable payment I ever received. From Dr. Esther Johnson, who taught me that true wealth is measured in lives touched, not dollars earned." He hung it on the wall opposite his desk, where he'd see it every morning. Where Rebecca's photo still sat in its silver frame, her smile forever frozen at 7 years old. "I did it, baby," he whispered to the photograph. "I know I couldn't save you. But maybe I helped save someone else's little girl. Maybe that's enough." Outside, twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. In the guest house, which had long since become Maya's permanent home, lights flickered on. Laughter drifted through the open windows, the sound of a family that had found its way from darkness into something that looked impossibly like joy. Marcus stood at his window, watching the scene, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but its transformation into purpose. Rebecca would never come back. That hollow space would never fully heal. But perhaps it had become something else, a doorway through which he'd learned to see the world differently. To see children like Esther not as statistics or charity cases, but as human beings whose potential was being crushed by systems he'd helped build. The Hills Foundation had grown exponentially. Maya now ran it, transforming it from a tax shelter into an engine of genuine change. They'd funded free clinics, subsidized insulin programs, lobbied for drug pricing reform, and scholarships for hundreds of students like Esther, kids who'd been told they didn't belong in medicine because they came from the wrong zip code. His phone buzzed. A text from Esther, "Dinner tomorrow? Mama's making her famous spaghetti. You're required to attend. Doctor's orders." Marcus smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." He looked once more at the framed dollar bill, at Rebecca's photo, at the life he'd built from the wreckage of grief. Once, he'd thought money could solve everything. Then he'd learned it could solve nothing. Now finally, he understood the truth. Money was just a tool. What mattered was whose hands held it and what they chose to build. A little girl had promised to pay him back with her whole life. Instead, she'd given him something far more valuable, a reason to believe that broken things, people, systems, hearts, could still be mended. That redemption wasn't found in grand gestures, but in daily choices to show up, to fight, to see humanity in faces the world had decided to ignore. Marcus turned off the study light and headed toward the guest house, toward the warmth and laughter and the makeshift family that had saved him as surely as he'd saved them. The debt, he realized, had never been about money at all. It was about second chances, about choosing every day to be better than yesterday, about learning that true wealth is measured in lives touched and hope restored. And by that measure, Marcus Hills, once the pharmaceutical titan who priced life itself, had finally become the richest man alive. Esther walked into that pharmacy with $4.67 and a promise that changed 2 lives forever. She thought she was begging for medicine, but what she really gave Marcus was something money could never buy, a second chance at becoming the man his daughter believed he was. That's the power of one moment, one choice, one person refusing to walk away. If this story reminded you that hope is still alive, smash that like button and subscribe for daily stories that prove humanity is worth fighting for. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. I want to see how far Esther's courage travels. Share this with someone who needs to remember that broken things can still be beautiful, and don't miss tomorrow's story about a secret that tears a family apart and the truth that brings them back together. See you then.